two women together? That doesn't make a complete relationship. That's why it wasn't illegal at the time when two men together was illegal. But you may be surprised at how powerful and how healing a relationship between two women can actually be. To show you that, today I am going to discuss literary giant Virginia Woolf and her relationship with Vita Sackville West. Hey guys, it's me, Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. And today I am spilling the literary tea on Virginia Woolf. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and let's dive into the video. Virginia Woolf is one of the most iconic, celebrated, respected female authors of the 20th century. And you know what I'm about to say. Her life was one of profound tragedy and sadness. Why are all authors depressed? Why do all authors come from sad circumstances? Maybe we need to make another video about that. But anyway, since it's Pride Month, I wanted to talk about Virginia Woolf and specifically her long-term relationship with fellow writer Vita Sackville West, and how Woolf's relationship with her and with the other women in her life represented healing, love, and gentleness which she desperately needed, and which sparked her imagination in a way that had not been done before. So to do that, I'm going to go briefly over her life, the relationship, and a little bit about the novel Orlando, which took much of its inspiration from their relationship. And now, because I can't be making a 3-hour video, I am skipping over so much detail. So if you're going to get Poindexter is going to go, you missed out on this and that. I'm sorry, I don't have time to make a documentary right now. But if you are interested, there's a wealth of knowledge and information out there about Virginia Woolf, her life, her works, and she is truly an institution in modern English literature. So just for today, I'm going to focus on the relationship and that glimmer of hope that it created in her life. And Sapphics, get ready, because this one's for you. So, born Adeline Virginia Woolf in January of 1882, Virginia was one of the youngest of the children of philanthropist Julia Presnip Jackson and author-historian Sir Leslie Jackson. So the two were the parents. They were both on their second marriages with each other, so they had blended the family with the older siblings from the previous relationship, and then they had a few children of their own. So it's a big Brady Bunch, a big bunch of children. Virginia is in the younger set. Virginia was educated at home, and they were a fairly well-to-do family. She was always reading and writing, and it was said that she had been given unrestricted access to her father's expansive library and that she took advantage of it very well. She was extremely well read. She also wrote a little family newsletter. She wrote little stories. It was obvious from the start of her life that this was going to be her calling and her passion. Sadly, her mother died in 1895, so she's only 13 years old. It's terrible timing. If you've been 13, which I imagine most of you have, it's not a great time for tragedy to strike. So this triggered a period in her life of a terrible mental breakdown and just terrible mental health in general. Her mother was so important to her, and she desperately needed this connection with women in her life. So her older sister, Stella, took the role of maternal figure for the family, but unfortunately, a few short years later, Stella also died. So we already have a very sad, very sensitive young woman who has already suffered much. The two women in her life who were so meaningful, who were meant to guide her, they're gone. And to make matters worse, we also know that her awful older stepbrother, Gerald Duckworth, sexually abused her. So, as you can imagine, all of this is culminating and creating this terrible storm of frail mental health. And as she grew, she, was introduced to the literary set of Cambridge, where her brothers were attending. She sadly did not attend, although she probably should have. Um, she wasn't formally educated, but she soon found that she was miles ahead of her contemporaries intellectually, and she was much more well read than they were. So, this literary group, it went through several formations, but it would eventually become the famous Bloomsbury Group. And it was comprised of several other famous authors of the time, such as Clive Bell, E.M. Forster, and Leonard Woolf, whom she would eventually marry. So Virginia at this time was writing and submitting to papers and magazines. She was working on her own stories, but she hadn't published anything quite yet. She was truly prolific. She was constantly writing it, if not these stories, then letters and diaries and things like that. And it was said that this Bloomsbury group was getting more and more political. Obviously, it's the early 20th century. There's a lot to talk about politically, and it's they were discussing really progressive ideas and even open discussions of sexuality. And as you can imagine, you know, in those days, those things were not spoken about in polite society. So it just shows how they were pushing the boundaries of what was socially acceptable. They were truly on the front lines of the literary landscape. And there were many LGBTQ members of this group, and many who believed in open relationships, gender fluidity, and these ideas that just were not spoken of at the time. So she eventually did marry Leonard Woolf, after he asked a few times. And she said no, but then she finally said yes. And then she published her first novel, The Voyage Out. And it should be noted here that the same horrible stepbrother who molested her was the owner of the publishing house that she submitted her novel to. So, as you can imagine, that process, the back and forth and the editing and the having to deal with him while trying to do the thing that she knows she's supposed to do in this life, it was extremely tasking and extremely difficult for her. And it also triggered another mental breakdown. But, you know, she overcame and the novel was published. So Virginia Woolf eventually met, through her writer friends and writer groups, Vida Sackville West, who was another author. And throughout Virginia's marriage to Leonard, she had numerous affairs and relationships with women. It's so interesting because from Leonard's side, we know that he truly loved her. He loved her. He was completely devoted to her. He cared for her throughout her bouts of frail mental health, and he even helped her start the Hogarth Press, which was their own publishing house, so that God, I'm going to cry. It's so sweet. So that they could publish her books and so that she didn't have to deal with the stepbrother. So he was completely devoted to her. He was this unwavering pillar of strength in her life, and he knew that she wasn't necessarily that attracted to him, but he didn't care. He loved her anyway. He knew about the relationships with other women, and he accepted that. He accepted that Virginia preferred women. And it is believed that they didn't have much of a sexual relationship at all. And instead, they're living this, it's sort of a lavender marriage. And Vida Sackville West herself had something of the same. She was also married, and the two of them had various dalliances and relationships with same sex partners outside of their marriage. So they're living a very progressive life, especially by the standard of those days. Her relationship with Sackville West was tumultuous. It spanned an entire decade, and the two of them disagreed on many fronts. They had this fiery, passionate love. And it was also a time for the two of them to be enormously creative. They both blossomed in their creativity at this time because they inspired each other. And so they're both writing, and for Virginia Woolf, it was the most productive time of her writing career. This is when she wrote the novel Orlando. And okay, Orlando is going to open up this huge can of worms. It's a very dense novel, and there's a lot to say about it. So I can't do a full analysis, and I can't even go over the whole plot. It's a lot if you want to read it. But I just want to go over kind of the fun parts, which were inspired by Vita Sackville West. So the story is it's like a mock biography of this person called Orlando, and it goes over several centuries, and it's sort of like an early modern Forrest Gump with an LGBTQ twist, because Orlando's going through all these like specific important periods in history. And then the really interesting part is, at one point, Orlando, who begins the story as a man, falls asleep for a few weeks and then metamorphosizes to become a woman. So it's just going to show this idea of gender fluidity that, again, was not really touched on in those days. But because Virginia Woolf was so inspired by her lover, and because she was so willing to be daring at this time, this is what she put into the novel. So that's really the big takeaway from this novel. And there's other things that she was inspired by, her personality, and Vita Sackville West was also from an aristocratic family, so it's all really inspired by her. And she was able to write this massive, dense, interesting, daring novel, all inspired by her lover. And it's the big takeaway here. It goes to show that this time, because Virginia Woolf felt so safe with Vita Sackville West, and because the two of them inspired each other so much, she was able to have this time of prolific writing and creativity, and she was able to express herself physically and emotionally, and to write this groundbreaking novel. And, to touch on, was Virginia Woolf classed as a lesbian? Was she not? I'm not entirely sure. She was married to a man, and she never used those words herself, but we do have these words from Vita Sackville West's diary. Virginia dislikes the possessiveness and love of domination in men. In fact, she dislikes the quality of masculinity, and says that women stimulate her imagination by their grace and their art of life. So this time in her life was qualified by just that. It's being inspired by the grace and beauty of women. And furthermore, Virginia was able to heal in other ways. She was able to share her terrible traumas about, the death of her mother and her sister, and of, the horrible abuse that she suffered by the hands of her stepbrother. She was able to open up to Vita Sackville West about this because she felt safe. And it was also said that during this time, Virginia Woolf bought a mirror for the first time in her life, because she was finally able to look at her own reflection and not dislike what she saw. Vita helped her love herself. She taught her how to rest and how to stop focusing on the negative. She encouraged her to write, and she truly believed in her genius and told her how brilliant she was. And This relationship was the healing and the respite that Virginia Woolf needed. Now, they did have their differences. So, most notably, they both knew that Virginia Woolf was the better writer, and they tried not to make that a wedge between them, but it sometimes was. And furthermore, Sackville West comes from this aristocratic old money family. I'm talking like mega wealth, which far exceeded that of, the nice, good class upbringing of Virginia Woolf. And Vita's childhood home, which was this expansive estate called Knoll, it would have gone to her if she had been a man. But because of England's inheritance laws, because Vita Sackville West was a woman, she didn't get Knoll. It went to her cousin. And Virginia Woolf just was outraged by that. And she couldn't see how Sackville West could participate in this institution of aristocracy because she saw the inherent unfairness that came with it. She was extremely critical of England's patriarchal and classist status quo. And furthermore, with the rise of fascism across the UK and across Europe, Woolf was mortified by Sackville West and her husband, Harold Nicholson's involvement with Oswald Mosley and his new party. If that name sounds familiar, you might remember him. He is one of the villains in Peaky Blinders, and he was also, yes, a real life person and a fascist. So, Woolf's inability to focus on the good and her habit of always seeing the negativity in life, it made her unable to see what a good thing she had and to preserve it. So, I know I just said it's unfair to like retroactively diagnose people, but I think it's fair to say that Virginia Woolf was depressed. She's extremely depressed. That's quite obvious. And as I said in my video about depression, part of what comes with that terrible disease is just that this inability to look past the negative and just getting caught up in it and just seeing how unfair it is. And this is what led to their breakup. Even though they distanced themselves for a time, they were eventually able to become friends again. This 10-year period of gentleness, self-care, and of being one's true self was sadly ended just a few years before Woolf's own death. She did indeed take her own life. It was all just too much for her. The Second World War was breaking out. Her new novel wasn't performing well. Everything was just too much. So, what can we learn from Sackville West and Virginia Woolf's beautiful affair? First of all, I think it just shows like don't be afraid to embrace your differences and let your life take a little bit different shape than what others might see as normal. The Bloomsbury Group was leading the way in sexual open-mindedness, and because of that, Virginia was able to experience this beautiful relationship with the person that she needed. And furthermore, I think we have to try to make those good moments last. I don't know if their relationship could have survived in some way or another, but imagine if it could. Imagine if Woolf could have focused on the good and instead of trying to focus on the negative. And what if we just focus on the good? What if, and those parts that we can't ignore, the parts that just really get to us, rather than get fixated on them, why not run into the arms of someone whom we care about to find solace? And I don't know, as someone who has this exact struggle, this exact disease that Virginia Woolf has, I'm trying to find that answer for myself. I feel for her. She is one of those that when I read about her, I just, I feel a lot of empathy, and I see myself in her as well. And one thing I have learned lately is that the mind indeed is a powerful thing, and we can slowly train it over time. And a mantra I've had lately is that hope is better than despair. So when you find yourself in that place of darkness, please try to cling on to hope. And hope may be foolish, but I'd rather be a fool than a cynic. So let's all just cling on to hope together. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sapphics, let me know. Do you love this relationship? Who is your Vita Sackville West in this world? And who are the important women in your life? I really want to know. And happy Pride Month, everybody. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye.